My name is Iris Simmons and I lived at 143 Linton Road, and I lived with my mum and dad, and I had 7 brothers and 3 sisters, and we all got on together and we all had our different jobs, you know, in the home. The boys had shoe polishing and cleaning windows. The girls did a bit of housework, which my mum showed us how to do. But my dad taught me to knit. He used to sit me on his lap and he used to have the needle, the needles, and he used to say in, through, round and up until I got it.
Well, I was born in here to start with. I was born in Rotherhithe. My dad worked in the docks all his life, and my mum worked at Pete Freen's all her life. I went to school on the road, and from there, when I was 15, I started work.
My mother, when she could, in between having babies, she used to be a cleaner. All the other ladies in that area, they would go out early morning, walk over London Bridge to the offices and clean them. My father worked in the Surrey docks. I think sometimes he may do a day here and there in other docks, but mostly Surrey docks on the timber ships.
Your father worked in the docks mostly round here. Your mother worked in a factory. Your sister worked in a factory. Your aunt worked in a factory. Nearly everybody worked in a factory, and the husbands worked in the docks.
Bermondsey was thriving. There were so many factories, and I mean, you could just go, I'm going to go and get a job, and you go and get a job. And I never knew where my mum was working, because she worked in Pearson Duff's making custard and blancmanges. She worked in Pete Freen's making biscuits. She worked in Swift's, that was a cheese company in Druid Street, where she used to cut mould off a cheese and it'd get repacked again, not very nice. She worked in Shuttlesworth, the sweet factory. Oh my gosh, she worked in Norman, she worked in Woolworths. All her work was in Bermondsey.
South East London as a centre of heritage is quite strong, because you know, until modern times, with the rise of the office and the residential as the 2 kind of key categories, you know, South East London was a place of big industry related to the docks and the water. You know, there's all those wharves along the river and the Surrey docks and things. So when you look into the history of the working class industry, certainly Southwark and Bermondsey in particular, Rotherhithe, and also obviously East London, there's very rich social histories.
There was factories everywhere. There was the metal factory, and they used to call that tin bashing. And I think that lady next door used to do that, tin bashing, but I never done that. I only went to the biscuit and the chocolate and the cleaning.
My working life involved round catering. Yes, but before I really got into catering, there was some factories along Rotherhithe Street. There was a lard factory there. I used to work during the day in the lard factory, and then in the evenings, 6 till 10 o'clock, I used to work at Pete Freen's Biscuits.
They was nearly all factories where women worked, no men. Shuttlesworth, very few men worked. That was his chocolate firm. Pete Freen's, there was a few men, but not. There was mostly women. In all of them, it was mostly women. Cross and Blackwell's, Hartley's, the jam factory. It was all mostly women, you know, because most of it was piecework.
traditionally, the women had been a major part of the workforce, and so they were relied on, not just after the war but before, between the wars, right from the 19th century, because dock work for the men was precarious, to say the least. You weren't guaranteed a job every day.
My nan, as a female worker in the factory, fitted into that kind of working class archetype of the female workers who went to work straight from school and were very much, everyone in the family worked. There wasn't a certain, demographic that got away with being in education for longer or whatever because they all had to work. And certainly, when I speak about my nan going to work in the factories at age 15, at age 13 and 14, she was working on a vegetable van for her aunt who had a grocer's shop in Nunhead.
I started work at 14. I was dressmaking for 14 years. I was 28 before I had my first baby. But I used to do all that. And I don't know. I don't know how I did it now. But you just get on with it, don't you?
I was about 15 and a half. My first job was in Bermondsey Street. So I wasn't travelling far. In an office, a manufacturing company, I can't remember what they did now. And I had my first child at 22 in 1954. So just to get some extra money, I found out that Pete Freens, the biscuit people, took you on for a short shift in the evenings. Well, that was good because Grandma had the baby, so I had no paying out to anyone to look after Michael. I went round to Pete Freens 5 nights a week, and it was a different work in there to office work. Everyone was friendly, laughing, and come on, the quicker we work, the more we earn.
In between, I used to pack up the biscuit place and Easter time do the Easter eggs and that at the chocolate factory. And we used to make Easter eggs and then wrap them and everything. And then I went on to where they done the after eights, packing them. You do it all different. It's the same at Pete Freens. You start on the creaming biscuits and that, but then I become I used to have to go round and weigh to make sure they were right. And I used to have they used to call me. They said I always looked like a nurse walking back because we was all in white, wasn't we? They used to have tie back.
My mum didn't work anywhere else but Pete Freens. She went there at 14. She worked there till she got married, because then, years ago, you had to leave when you got married. You couldn't stop there. So she left. Then she had me. Then the war started. Then she went back. And she had she worked on what they call Vital Wheat. That was down in the bakehouse of Pete Freens. And she was down there for years. And then all of a sudden, no, she still stopped down there. That's right, she still stopped down there. She wouldn't go anywhere else. And I used to say to her, "Oh, Mum, don't you want to go anywhere else in Pete Freens?" She went, "No, I'm all right. I've got me mates and I enjoy it." But that wasn't piecework.
Pete Freens was probably the biggest factory. And for me, it was within walking distance. So that was a bonus. And you just knew everybody there. I think every family has had someone work at Pete Frates. Some have been there for years, some have been in the office for years. But to be able to get that job in walking distance and enjoy it was good. The other alternative was to get up early morning and go with your mum clean it to a cleaning company. Then who minds the baby?
I did double shift work to be able to survive. And just round the corner from us, there was a school called St Paul's, and my Karen used to go there. And I had a friend, I made friends with one of the neighbours, and she used to keep an eye on Karen till I got home.
Well, I started working when I was 15, and that was over the West End, and I packed that up because they wanted to put us anywhere. Then I came to Pete Frates at 18, and I worked there for 12 years. I got married from there, and I had to leave when I had my daughter. Then after my daughter was 5, I went to Norman's. That was a firm that made carrier bags and hat boxes down Gallywell Road.
The most significant thing about women's work in Bermondsey and in the factories is that these women were working together in large departments. You know, they weren't insignificant parts of the workforce. They were huge swathes of it. You know, it depended on them, and I think the same goes for the kind of munitions period during the Second World War. You know, all these women that had worked in the factories and industries in southeast London then went to work in the munitions factories, and that wasn't such a drastic change for them because they already were working factory roles. You know.
One of the advantages of the war was that in the 30s, a lot of the factories in Bermondsey operated what they called a marriage bar. So that if you married while you were working, say, at Pete Frates, you had to give up your job. By 45, 46, the companies like the Alaska Fur Factory and Pete Frates were sending out letters to women, married women, that had worked there before and saying, you know, please come back and work for us, because a lot of the workforce was gone.
Once I got married, the first year was all right. It was after I had my first baby. Then the trouble started. He started gambling, and he'd ring me up at 5 o'clock and said he was working, and he wasn't. And he'd come in at 2 o'clock in the morning. And with no wages. He'd walked from West End. He gambled it all. So I had to get a job. I went out morning cleaning at 4 o'clock in the morning, office cleaning, then Pete Frates at the night. That was 5:30 to 10. And then come home and have to wash the baby's clothes and that, and be ready at 4 o'clock in the morning to be at the bus stop. And we always had to walk the London Bridge because I worked in Fleet Street, and no buses went over the bridge. They went to the foot of the bridge, so you had to walk the rest of the way. Oh, when it was foggy, I was scared. I didn't mind so much before because you could look behind you if anyone's following, but when it's foggy, you can't see a thing.
We used to start at 7:30. You'd go in, you'd have your overall on, but not your hat. You wouldn't go up in the street with your hat. I wouldn't anyway. Then you'd go up to your floor. I was on MB2 Export, and there's a big board with all hooks on it and all round discs with numbers on it, and you all had a number. So you took the number off of the hook, and there was a box. You dropped it in the box. That proved that you was in work. Now, if you was 5 minutes, 3 minutes, any minutes late, you got stopped a quarter of an hour. So if you was going to be late, you made sure you was the quarter of an hour, because you wasn't going to lose a quarter of an hour's pay for 1 minute, so you stand outside.
So my mum used to work school shifts, so she'd get us to school and then she'd start work maybe 9:30 and finish 2:30 in time to pick us up from school. Previous to that we'd have our lunchtime, but after that we had to have school dinners. But every holiday she had off. But my mum chose to do that shift, but lots of other ladies did the evening shifts. But I always remember in Peak Frates it was called the Duvall Shift, because half the people were having affairs in there of a night.
So the evening work was usually people like me that with a baby that couldn't leave him or didn't want to leave him, to spend an evening away from all the washing and the crying, but at the end of the week have a nice wage packet. Wasn't much. I think it was about £4. That was a lot then.
Everybody's different, but my particular husband, he said, you work till, you stay at home till she's 5, you know, and I did, till she could go to school. That was the only thing that he did stand by, and that's what it had to happen. I couldn't have gone to work if I'd have wanted to, whether I had any money or not, because he said no. So, and I didn't answer back.
Mum's working day she did stay. She left work until I was about 5, and then she went back to work, and she started off with an evening shift at Peak Frates. She would go out in the evening around about 6 o'clock, and then she'd work through, I think, for about 4 hours in the evening. So she would go off, and then I wouldn't see her till the morning. And later on, as sort of about 7, she went back full time. So she would go out in the mornings early, round about school time, work all day. I think they had, at the factory, they would have a 15-minute break in the morning, half an hour for lunch. She would often come home in lunch hour, and I remember she did everything at a run. She would come home so that the kids could have a proper lunch, and we'd get home from school at lunchtime, and you'd see it running along like that, half trot, always a half trot. And lots of Bermondsey women have got this, did have this half trot, because they were always either getting to the factory, getting to their kids, and or getting to the next shift. She would give us something to eat, then trot back, run to the factory, and of course they would be clocking on.
Then you'd go in and you'd look on the board to see what you was doing, you know, what job you was going on. But I didn't have to do that, because I was on this machine all the time, on the LFA machine. And you work there till there was a tea break. You go and have your tea break, come back, work on till you had your dinner break, and same as in the afternoon. And then at 5:30 you'd go, oh God, it's time to go home, and away you went.
I was packing the lard in the boxes to go out. That was down Rotherhithe Street. And at Peak Frates, I was in the pudding room, knocking out the Christmas puddings to go to the dispatch to be wrapped. And that was hard work. The trays were heavy. And time I got home from there, I was absolutely shattered.
After she left Peak Frates, she went to work at Barrow Hepburn and Gale Leather Factory round the corner in Bermondsey, I think on Grange Road. And she always spoke about the beginnings of that job, as in it was a new area for her, and I don't know why she left Peak Friends, but she had to essentially learn a new trade. You know, previously she'd known how to pack biscuits and wash tins of biscuits and whatever other biscuit related activities they did. And going into the leather factory, they said to her, you know, you'll have to use the big needle and learn how to do this. And she was like, oh well, I'm sure if you show me how to do it, I can do it.
I had another child. Then when I had the two, then I returned to work. By this time I'd left Bermondsey altogether. I was living in Essex. But I lost my husband, so I thought it'd be best if I could get back to Bermondsey, where I got all the family that helped me bring up my two sons. And in them days, you got a letter from your doctor and you took it to the council and they gave you a place, which that's what's happened. Then I went back to work. Well, as much as I loved that 3.5 hours at Peak Friends, that was no good to me. It wasn't enough. So I went and I worked in office all day.
Well, I know it was hard work at Peak Friends, but I think the money was fair. But that's only Peak Friends. But we earned it because we was piecework. That's why we earned it. You know, if you didn't bother, you got peanuts. But I mean, we worked hard. If you wanted to work hard, you could. But if you didn't, well, that's your lookout.
The factory owners varied, obviously. There were some with a great social conscience. I'm thinking of the owner of Peak Friends, Carr. He was part of the Carr-Gom family, and I believe they were Quakers, and they did a lot for their workers. They would have sort of pay-in type of healthcare schemes to which they contributed. I know in the Alaska factory, after the war, there was a nurse, and there was so there was someone on hand to look after the health of the factory workers. There wasn't any trade union. In fact, I think in 1948, just after the war, the women did come out on strike, asking to be recognised and unionised, but I don't think they got anywhere. Instead, there was a sort of a workers' committee or a works committee, and they would bring up subjects like a cloakroom for the women, or maybe some more equipment for the social club, things like that.
So my nan told me all about the Binos, which I'd never heard of before, but apparently it means bean feast. If you look it up, that's what it stands for. But all of the girls, as part of their wage packet, would have a certain amount of money taken out of their wage to build up into a fund to enable them to go on an outing to somewhere, and they would call it a Bino. They'd all get in a coach and go down to Margate or Southend for the day. And my nan said it was an absolute riot, a hoot, you know, because by this point she was married, and she said that it was basically all the women going down to Southend to get drunk and go to the arcades, and then they would all come home to their husbands drunk, and their husbands would be at home in bed waiting for them, but they'd all come home together, all the women on this coach, singing and laughing and getting out of the coach on the motorway to do a wee on the side of the road and things. It was kind of pretty incredible culture going on in I guess an exclusively female environment, really.
I mean, I didn't play darts till my husband had died. I had more sort of freedom. I mean, it's not nice to say, but after he'd gone, you know what I mean? If he'd have known I was playing darts in a pub, he would have gone spare. But that's just the way it was. My sister-in-law, she had a pub, and she went, come and join our dart team, and I thought, no, I better not. But then I thought, well, what's stopping me? My Susan was 15, 16, she was doing her own thing, so I joined the dart team. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. Up to a certain time, I think I played for about 10 years. We won some trophies. But other than that, that was as much as I went out. Because I was working then. I was working for the council, cleaning.
Well, I had to work because I'd lost my husband. There was no nurseries. You had to find a neighbour, someone that was willing to have them. And to have two was impossible. So I'd take one to a family one way, leave him, and then go in another direction with the other one, and then get off to work. But I know they was looked after because they went to nice families.
I moved to London because I wanted to see the world, and London was the place to go in '60s because of the hippie movement and of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the fashion, and everything was happening in London then. What I found very interesting about this community there, which was very surprising as well in a big city, that everybody knew everybody else, and there was sort of lots of family members living in nearby. People didn't even lock their front doors. So it was a very friendly place to live in London. It wasn't like people of big cities are expected to be.
My happiest years was when in the 70s, starting from the 70s, no. Yes, starting from, say, the 60s, right up into the 70s, when I was over the city, when I was up there at West End, when I was doing the Freemasons, and when I was working for the Jewish people, the Bar Mitzvahs, anything could go in. I was in my element.
I didn't finish up till after I left my husband, I think. I did leave him when my daughter was 18, that was a long time after. I said I wouldn't leave until they were 18. Because I thought I had to see that they were all right first. But he swore such a lot, and we wasn't brought up like that, and I couldn't stand it no longer. But I didn't divorce, because I don't believe in that either. But when he was not well, I used to go around and help. I used to take him to the barbers when he couldn't go himself, and down the doctors, you know. Well, that's what you go through with marriage. It says for better or worse. So.
The dock closures in the late 70s had a massive effect on this area, because the docks were the lifeblood of the area. The place was called London's larder, because food from all over the world came into the docks fronting Bermondsey, and they would then be just transported into the food factories or whatever, produce factories, and they actually literally were what made the area thrive. So when they closed, and suddenly firms like the firm that my dad worked for, Garner's, the leather factory, moved out to, I think it was Leatherhead. Your parents had a choice sometimes. Did they move out and go to these outlying areas, suburbs where the factories were going, and up sticks and move their family, or did they now try to look for different work?
Lots of these women started having like office jobs because the biscuit factory was closed as well. There were some people working there, so more or less all the factories were closed pretty soon after the docks were closed.
Well, it affected everybody really, because not only did you not have no jobs and you couldn't find, well, it took you a long time to find another job, but nothing was built in the place of these things. Nothing, not one thing was built for people to do as a job.
I went to Westminster College for 4 months and I learned all about silver service waitressing. I passed my exams and that's when I started going to bigger time and I started working for stockbrokers.
I went to work in an office which was in Adelaide House, which is the first building on London Bridge on the other side. And it was funny because there was still discrimination against women even then, because we never queried it, but men could smoke in the offices, but we couldn't.
I went to university in 1972 and I was the first of my family ever to go to university, and before then it hadn't been common for Bermondsey people to go to university. The way I got to that position was that I went to a local grammar school called Alwyn Grammar School, and I just naturally loved studying. And by this stage, Mum and Dad were a bit better off. They'd changed jobs, and when the opportunity came up to go to university, they really encouraged me. At the time, it was a privilege really. At the time you didn't realise it, but there was a very good grant system.
When I started working in a hospital, the whole, in the King's College Hospital, they were employing 7,000 people there, so they had a very big payroll department. And nearly everybody who worked there, all of them were women, more or less. There are very few men working in the payroll department, and they were all very competent working class women. And earlier on, lots of them have worked in the factories, and they were just like a very good dressmakers because they have worked in some factory and so on. But they didn't have any formal education. They actually used to train people in a hospital, like how to do the payroll, and teach them more or less maths while they're doing it. But when there were like opportunities like be the payroll manager or something like that, they would never ever apply for the job because they didn't want sort of maybe a responsibility on it, or they had this way of thinking that we can't do it or something, and they were quite capable of doing it. But we had 1 or 2 men, they would apply, and they were lots of women who were better than they were, and they got it.
I think I was 20 at the time. I was offered promotion to be a tea broker, and there was still lots of prejudice towards women then, and I was very lucky. I was really frightened first of all because all the men in the office decided that they didn't like this at all, and so a lot of them made it quite difficult for me. But I am quite a strong person, and I thought, no, you can't do this to me.
I've never got equal pay. Never. I found it very hurtful that a man wouldn't be doing as much work as me, but I knew he always took home more wages than me. We had no one to fight for us. And you see, what people forget, because we never earned the same, we don't get the same pension. So we're still lower. My pension's still lower than any man that I've worked alongside, because he always took home more than me. And then they'd come up and say, "Can you help me with this? Do you understand the VAT?" I got, "No, I haven't got a clue." I thought, "No, I'm not doing it. You get the money, I'm not doing it, no." I don't think we'll ever get equal pay.
We were just beginning to find ourselves as women. You know, the suffragettes started us off, but even in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s, we had a long way to go, do you know, and I was determined I was going to do this job, because I thought, they can't stop me having this. I've been offered it, and they said to me, "You shouldn't have really got that." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, because you're a woman." Well, how do you work that out? Do you know what I mean? What am I supposed to do? Work in factories and sweep floors? No. If I'm as bright as you, I'm going to earn the same as you. And no one's going to do nothing about that.